My name is Emma Carter. I was 28 years old the morning my mother forced her way into a private boardroom she had never been invited to. She was screaming before the doors had even fully opened. That company belongs to our family. The room fell silent. 32 executives. 5 attorneys. 3 members of the board. 2 journalists invited to document the legacy announcement. Everyone turned toward the woman whose expensive smile had disappeared the moment she realized the inheritance wasn't going where she expected. She pointed directly at me. She manipulated him. She's not even his real daughter. Nobody answered. Nobody defended her. Nobody needed to. Because the man whose fortune she wanted had spent the last 6 years preparing for that exact moment. Every accusation. Every lie. Every fake apology. Every attempt to use me for money. Everything had been documented. When my mother's lawyer finally opened the sealed envelope waiting beside the will, he quietly packed his briefcase. 5 minutes later he walked out. He refused to represent my parents anymore. That should have been the end. But to understand why my own mother embarrassed herself in front of an entire board of directors, you have to go back 15 years. Back to the day I stopped being her daughter. I was 13 years old. Our house wasn't poor. It wasn't rich either. My father owned a small construction company in Ohio. My mother taught piano lessons from home. From the outside we looked like the perfect family. Inside, everything revolved around my older brother Ethan. If Ethan wanted something, he got it. If Ethan made a mistake, someone else paid for it. Usually me. He was 3 years older than I was. Good looking. Popular. Captain of the baseball team. My parents called him our future. They called me the difficult one. Not because I caused trouble. Because I asked questions. Questions my parents didn't like answering. Like why Ethan received a new car at 16 while I couldn't even replace my broken school shoes. Or why my college savings account suddenly had less money every year. Whenever I asked, my father had only one answer. You're too young to understand. One afternoon I came home early from school because my history teacher was sick. The house was unusually quiet. Mom's piano students had already left. As I walked toward the kitchen, I heard my parents arguing. Not loudly. Whispering. The kind of whisper adults use when they're hiding something. Dad sounded nervous. We'll have to move the rest before she notices. Mom sighed. She won't. What if she asks? We'll tell her the market went down. I stopped outside the doorway. Move what? Dad spoke again. Ethan needs tuition. Mom answered without hesitation. He deserves it more. My heart started pounding. Tuition? The only savings account in our family with enough money for college was mine. I stepped into the kitchen. What savings account? Both of them froze. Mom forced a smile. Oh, sweetheart. Dad interrupted. You weren't supposed to hear that. I looked from one face to the other. You took my college money? Nobody answered. That silence told me everything. The account had been opened by my grandmother before she passed away. She left instructions that the money was for my education only. I knew because she'd shown me the paperwork herself. She used to say, education is something nobody can steal from you. Turns out, she was wrong. My parents had been quietly withdrawing money for almost 2 years. To pay Ethan's private baseball coaches. His tournaments. His truck. His girlfriend's vacation. Everything. I couldn't believe it. Grandma left that money for me. Mom crossed her arms. Ethan has more potential. I stared at her. What? He'll actually do something important. Dad nodded. We're investing in the child with the brightest future. I felt something inside me break. Not anger. Not sadness. Something much deeper. The realization that I'd never actually been their priority. Not once. That evening I called Grandma's attorney. I found his business card inside one of her old birthday cards. His name was Daniel Brooks. He listened quietly while I explained everything. Then he asked one question. Emma, are you absolutely certain? Yes. I'll look into it. 3 days later. My parents received a certified legal letter. Someone had requested an audit of the education trust. Dad exploded. He stormed into my bedroom holding the envelope. You did this? I didn't deny it. You stole Grandma's money. His face turned bright red. Mom appeared behind him. You embarrassed this family. No. You embarrass yourselves. That was the first time I'd ever spoken back. It was also the last conversation we had as a family. Dad grabbed my backpack. Opened my closet. Started throwing my clothes inside. Mom watched. She didn't stop him. Not once. When he finished, he tossed the bag onto the porch. If you think strangers matter more than family, he said quietly, go live with them. I waited. I honestly believed Mom would stop him. She didn't. She simply locked the front door. I stood outside. 13 years old. One backpack. $38 in my pocket. And nowhere to go. It started raining less than 10 minutes later. I walked to the public library because it stayed open until 8. It was warm. Quiet. Safe. I sat in the corner pretending to read while trying not to cry. An elderly man noticed me almost immediately. Mr. Arthur Whitmore. Head librarian. Everyone in town knew him. He'd worked there for nearly 40 years. He walked over carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate. Long afternoon? I nodded. He sat beside me. Didn't ask questions. Didn't pressure me. He simply placed the cup in front of me. You don't have to tell me anything. We sat there in silence for nearly 15 minutes. Finally, I whispered, I don't have anywhere to sleep. He looked at me for a long moment. Then stood. I think, he said gently. It's time I made a phone call. I didn't know it then. But that single phone call would change every part of my life. Because Arthur Whitmore wasn't just a librarian. Before retiring, he had founded one of the largest educational publishing companies in America. A company worth tens of millions. Almost nobody in town knew. He never talked about it. He preferred spending his retirement organizing children's books instead of attending board meetings. That night, instead of calling social services immediately, he called one person first. His attorney. And before the week was over, my entire life had begun again. Arthur didn't ask me what my parents had done. He didn't ask whether I had deserved it. He didn't even ask if I planned to go back. Instead, he asked a question no adult had ever asked me before. What do you want your life to look like 5 years from now? I stared at him. Nobody had ever cared what I wanted. Not my parents. Not my teachers. Not even my relatives. I quietly answered. I just want someone to believe me. Arthur smiled. That's a much easier dream than you think. The next morning he introduced me to his attorney, Rebecca Collins. She specialized in family and trust law. Within 2 weeks the investigation into my grandmother's education trust was complete. Everything I had suspected was true. My parents had withdrawn nearly every dollar. Nearly $160,000. Most of it had gone toward Ethan's baseball career. Luxury equipment. Private coaching. Travel tournaments. A pickup truck. Even a vacation after one of his tournaments. The trust specifically prohibited those withdrawals. My grandmother had written it herself. Rebecca looked at me across the conference table. You can sue. I looked down. They're still my parents. Arthur gently interrupted. No. They're simply the people who raised you. Family earns the title. Because I was still a minor, the court appointed Arthur as my legal guardian. My parents never fought it. Not once. That hurt more than anything. No desperate phone calls. No apology. No attempts to bring me home. It was almost as if they were relieved. A week later I officially became Emma Whitmore's ward. Arthur converted his upstairs study into my bedroom. Nothing fancy. A wooden desk. Bookshelves covering every wall. A small bed beside a window overlooking a quiet park. The first night I couldn't sleep. Arthur knocked softly before entering. He placed an old fountain pen on the desk. This belonged to my father. It signed every important contract I ever made. One day you'll sign something important with it too. I still have that pen. Living with Arthur felt strange. There were no arguments. No shouting. No comparisons. Every evening we ate dinner together. After dinner he asked one question. What did you learn today? Not. What grade did you get? Not. Did you win? Just. What did you learn? Little by little. I began believing I mattered. Arthur never spoiled me. He believed discipline created freedom. If I wanted something, I earned it. I organized library events. Cataloged donated books. Helped children with reading programs. During summer vacations I worked in the archives of his publishing company. That was where I first learned who Arthur Whitmore really was. Whitmore Educational Press. Founded 42 years earlier. Over 800 employees. Textbooks used in thousands of schools. Digital learning platforms across North America. Annual revenue. More than $60 million. Yet Arthur still drove a 15-year-old sedan. Still wore the same brown cardigan every winter. Still spent Saturdays repairing broken library shelves himself. When I turned 18, Arthur gave me access to the company internship program. He didn't make me an executive. He started me in customer support. For nearly 2 years, I answered complaint emails. Processed damaged textbook returns. Work weekends. Nobody knew I lived with the founder. Arthur insisted. If people respect you because of me, they'll never respect you because of yourself. So I earned every promotion. Marketing assistant. Operations analyst. Regional manager. Director of digital education. By 28, I had become chief operating officer. Every promotion required approval from the board. Arthur never voted. He always left the room. If she deserves it, you won't need my opinion. Meanwhile, I never heard from my parents. Not once. 15 birthdays. 15 Christmases. Nothing. Occasionally I'd hear about Ethan through old classmates. His baseball career had ended after college. He bounced between jobs. My parents had mortgaged their home twice. Still, they never contacted me. Until Arthur became sick. It began with exhaustion. Then hospital visits. Then chemotherapy. Arthur never complained. Even while receiving treatment. He reviewed manuscripts from his hospital bed. One afternoon he handed me a sealed envelope. Don't open this until after I'm gone. I tried to protest. He shook his head. We prepare because we love. Not because we expect. Arthur passed away peacefully 9 months later. He was 81. The funeral filled an entire church. Teachers. Authors. Employees. Former students. People whose lives he'd quietly changed over 4 decades. I stood near the front greeting guests. That's when I saw them. My mother. My father. And Ethan. They walked in wearing black. As though they had been part of Arthur's life. Mom rushed toward me with tears already flowing. Oh sweetheart. We've missed you so much. I simply looked at her. She tried hugging me. I stepped back. The expression on her face changed for only a second. Long enough for me to realize. The tears had disappeared. She wasn't grieving. She was performing. My father shook my hand as though we'd spoken last week. Family needs to stick together. Those were the first words he'd spoken to me in 15 years. Not. I'm sorry. Not. How have you been? Just. Family. Arthur had warned me about moments like this. When people disappear during your struggle. Pay attention to when they return. 3 days after the funeral. The phone call started. Mom left cheerful voicemails. Dad suddenly wanted dinner. Ethan invited me to meet his children. It was almost funny. Then came the message that explained everything. A cousin accidentally forwarded me a family group chat. One sentence stood out. I heard Arthur left everything to Emma. There it was. Not love. Not regret. Money. Exactly what Arthur expected. I forwarded every message to Rebecca Collins. She replied with only 4 words. Keep every single one. A week later. Rebecca invited me to her office. Arthur's final instructions had arrived. The will would not be read privately. Instead, it would be announced during the company's annual board meeting. Executives. Employees. Charity directors. Corporate attorneys. Journalists. Everyone would be present. Rebecca looked directly at me. Arthur planned this years ago. He believed certain people only tell the truth when witnesses are present. I glanced toward the sealed envelope Arthur had left behind. For the first time, I wondered what was inside. I wouldn't have to wait much longer. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Friday. Arthur had chosen the date himself nearly a year earlier. According to Rebecca, he had planned every detail. Who would be invited? Where everyone would sit. What would happen first? Even where the cameras would be placed. He used to say, truth doesn't need drama. It only needs witnesses. That morning I woke before sunrise. I made coffee the same way Arthur had taught me. Strong. Black. No sugar. His fountain pen rested beside my keys on the kitchen counter. I slipped it into my blazer pocket. Somehow it made me feel as though he was still walking beside me. Whitmore Educational Press occupied 20 floors of a glass tower downtown. The boardroom was on the 19th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. A long walnut table stretched almost the entire length of the room. 40 seats had already been arranged. Each had a printed name card. Mine sat beside Rebecca. Arthur's chair remained empty. A single white rose rested on the table in front of it. Nobody touched it. By 9:30 the room had filled. Senior executives. Department directors. Members of Arthur's charitable foundation. Editors. School superintendents. 2 local newspaper reporters. Everyone spoke quietly. Arthur had changed thousands of lives. People weren't there because of money. They were there because they loved him. Rebecca walked over carrying 3 sealed folders. Everything is ready. I nodded. Then she added quietly. They're here. I didn't need to ask who. My parents entered exactly at 9:47. Mom wore an expensive black designer dress. Dad had rented a suit. Ethan walked behind them looking uncomfortable. Mom immediately began introducing herself. I'm Arthur's daughter's mother. He always considered us family. The statement wasn't technically true. But she repeated it anyway. She shook hands. Smiled. Accepted condolences. Acted as though she had spent years beside Arthur. Several employees looked confused. Most had never seen her before. Dad's attention wasn't on people. He kept scanning the room. Counting faces. Looking for attorneys. Looking for opportunities. When his eyes found me, he smiled. It was the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in 15 years. It made me sick. Not because it was cruel. Because I knew exactly what had caused it. He believed he had already won. At exactly 10 o'clock. Rebecca stood. The conversation stopped. She welcomed everyone. Thanked them for honoring Arthur's memory. Then she opened the leather binder resting before her. This meeting serves 2 purposes. First, to honor Arthur Whitmore. Second, to announce the future ownership of Whitmore Educational Press according to his final will. Silence settled across the room. Rebecca began reading Arthur's charitable gifts. Millions donated to literacy foundations. Scholarships. Libraries. Children's hospitals. Every announcement drew soft applause. Arthur had always believed wealth meant responsibility. Not luxury. Then she turned another page. I now read Article 7. She looked toward me. Then continued. I leave my complete ownership of Whitmore Educational Press, including voting shares, intellectual property, company headquarters, publishing rights, investment accounts, and all remaining personal assets. She paused. To Emma Grace Carter. The room erupted into applause. I remained seated. Rebecca continued. Emma Carter is also appointed permanent chairwoman of Whitmore Educational Press. More applause. Then, everything changed. Mom stood so suddenly her chair crashed onto the floor. No. She pointed at me. This is impossible. She's manipulated him for years. Dad immediately stood beside her. This will is fraudulent. My daughter tricked an old man. Dozens of employees stared in disbelief. Rebecca remained calm. Please sit down. Mom ignored her. Arthur promised this company would stay in the family. Rebecca quietly replied. It has. Mom froze. What? Emma is the only family Arthur recognized. The room became painfully quiet. Dad slammed both hands onto the table. This girl abandoned us. Rebecca looked directly at him. Our records indicate otherwise. Dad frowned. What records? Rebecca smiled slightly. The ones Arthur asked us to preserve. She opened the first sealed folder. My heart started racing. Arthur had planned something. I just didn't know what. Rebecca removed a flash drive. She handed it to the technician. The lights dimmed. The projector came alive. A date appeared. April 8, 7 years earlier. Arthur sat inside this very boardroom. Healthy. Smiling. Looking directly into the camera. He began speaking. If you're watching this, I'm no longer here. A heavy silence filled the room. Arthur continued. There is one thing I want everyone present to understand. I did not choose Emma because I pitied her. I chose her because she earned every ounce of my trust. He smiled. When she arrived at my home, she owned exactly one backpack. Since then, she has never once asked me for money. Not once. She asked for opportunities. And then she created her own success. I felt tears building. Arthur looked almost alive. Then his expression changed. More serious. I also know there may be people who claim Emma manipulated me. If anyone makes that accusation, I asked Rebecca to play the next recording. The video ended. Rebecca opened the second folder. Inside was another flash drive. She inserted it. A phone conversation filled the speakers. My mother's voice. Crystal clear. The recording was 2 years old. Mom didn't know Arthur had been recording business calls. She laughed softly. So, if Emma inherits everything, we'll finally get what we're owed. Dad's voice followed. We threw her out once. We can charm her again. Then Ethan spoke. I don't care about Emma. I just want the company. The recording ended. No one moved. No one breathed. My mother's face turned white. Dad stared at the floor. Ethan closed his eyes. Rebecca calmly spoke. Arthur legally recorded every conversation conducted through his office telephone. The originals remain secured with our legal department. The journalists were already writing. Several board members looked physically shocked. One editor quietly whispered, "Oh my God." Mom suddenly burst into tears. Real tears this time. She rushed toward me. Emma. We made mistakes. We were young. We didn't know better. For the first time in 15 years. She sounded sincere. Or maybe she simply sounded desperate. She reached for my hand. I stepped backward. Exactly one step. The same distance she had stepped away from me when I was 13. I finally spoke. Not loudly. Just enough for everyone to hear. When I was 13, I stood outside our house in the rain. I waited for one of you to open the door. You never did. I looked at Dad. I wasn't asking for money. I wasn't asking for forgiveness. I just wanted parents. Neither of them could meet my eyes. I reached into my pocket, pulled out Arthur's fountain pen. Rebecca placed the ownership documents before me. I signed each page. One signature. Then another. Then the final one. When I finished, I closed the pen. The sound echoed through the silent room. Rebecca smiled. It is official. Congratulations, Chairwoman Carter. The room stood. Every employee. Every executive. Every board member. A standing ovation. Not because I had inherited a company. Because they knew exactly what Arthur had spent 15 years building. Not a business. A successor. Security quietly approached my parents. Nobody touched them. Nobody embarrassed them. They simply escorted them toward the door. My mother looked back one final time. I didn't. Arthur had taught me something years before. Closure doesn't come from watching people leave. It comes from deciding not to follow them anymore. The doors closed. And just like that, the chapter they had written for me ended forever. The boardroom slowly emptied. People came over one by one. Some shook my hand. Some hugged me. Others simply nodded with the kind of respect that didn't need words. Arthur had spent 40 years building this company. He had spent 15 years preparing me to lead it. Not one person questioned his decision. Only 3 people had. And they had already walked out. Or so I thought. 3 days later, Rebecca called me. They filed. I wasn't surprised. My father had hired another attorney. This time he claimed Arthur had been mentally incompetent during the final year of his life. The lawsuit demanded that the will be declared invalid. If successful, the company would be frozen. Every major decision would require court approval. Hundreds of employees could be affected. I asked Rebecca only one question. Are we ready? She smiled. I've been ready for 6 years. Arthur hadn't simply left behind a will. He had left behind evidence. Boxes of it. Every annual medical examination. Every psychological evaluation. Every board meeting recording. Every handwritten journal. Every business decision. Everything dated. Everything notarized. Arthur once joked. If anyone ever questions whether I'm thinking clearly, I'll give them enough paperwork to build another library. He wasn't joking. The court hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. The courtroom was full. Company executives sat behind me. Teachers Arthur had helped sat beside them. Former scholarship students filled the back rows. Across the aisle, my parents sat with their attorney. For the first time, they looked nervous. Not angry. Nervous. The judge reviewed the initial filing. Then Rebecca stood. She requested permission to introduce Exhibit 1. A thick leather journal. Arthur's personal diary. The judge approved. Rebecca opened the final page. Arthur's handwriting filled the paper. She read aloud. If my brother or anyone acting for him contests this will, understand one thing. This isn't about money. This is about a man who abandoned a child and only remembered her after learning she might inherit something. The courtroom became completely silent. Rebecca turned another page. Arthur had attached a handwritten timeline. Every attempt my parents made to contact him. Every request for money. Every ignored birthday. Every ignored Christmas. Every ignored graduation. 15 years. Organized down to the exact date. Then came Exhibit 2. Security footage. The judge watched silently. It showed the day Arthur's funeral ended. My parents hadn't gone home afterward. Instead, they had gone directly to a private parking lot. My father looked around before speaking. The audio was perfectly clear. "So how much do you think the old man left?" Mom laughed. "Hopefully enough that we'll never have to work again." My stomach tightened. This conversation happened less than an hour after Arthur's funeral. They hadn't been mourning. They had been calculating. Their attorney slowly removed his glasses. He leaned toward my father. Whispered something. Dad shook his head. The attorney whispered again. Finally, he stood. "Your Honor, my clients wish to withdraw their petition." The judge frowned. "After filing these allegations?" "Yes." Rebecca immediately objected. "Your Honor, the estate has already incurred substantial legal expenses. The petition was filed without factual support. We request reimbursement." The judge nodded. "Granted." My father closed his eyes. The lawsuit ended that day. But Arthur's final surprise hadn't even been revealed. A month later, Rebecca invited me back to Arthur's office. She carried a small wooden box. "I've been saving this." Arthur had instructed her not to open it until every legal challenge was finished. Inside was a handwritten envelope. My name covered the front. Just one word. Emma. I carefully unfolded the letter. Arthur's familiar handwriting smiled back at me. "Dear Emma. If you're reading this, it means you kept going. I'm proud of you. Not because you won, but because you refused to become like the people who hurt you." I stopped reading. My vision blurred. I took a deep breath before continuing. "There is one final decision I couldn't make for you. Across the street from the first library where we met sits an empty building. I purchased it 5 years ago. I never told you. It belongs to you now. Use it however you believe will help children who feel invisible. Because once upon a time, someone made room for one frightened little girl. Now it's your turn to make room for someone else." I cried for the first time since his funeral. Not because I missed him. I always would. I cried because even after he was gone, he was still teaching me. 6 months later, construction finished. The old building became the Whitmore Learning Center. Free tutoring, free meals, scholarships, computer labs, reading rooms, counseling services. Every child who walked through the doors received one promise. "You belong here." Those 3 words hung above the entrance, exactly where everyone could see them. One afternoon, a shy 13-year-old girl walked inside carrying a worn backpack. She looked terrified. She reminded me of someone. She quietly asked, "Can I stay here until my mom gets off work?" I smiled. Of course. Arthur had once opened a door for me. Now, I could open one for someone else. As for my parents, the lawsuit left them nearly bankrupt. Their attorney fees, court costs, and the estate's legal reimbursement forced them to sell their house. Ethan eventually moved to another state. We never spoke again. Mom mailed me 3 apology letters over the next year. I read the first one. She apologized for throwing me out. She apologized for choosing my brother. She apologized for treating love like something that had to be earned. I believe she meant every word. But forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes forgiveness simply means you stop carrying the anger. Not that you reopen the door. I never replied. Today, Whitmore Educational Press is larger than ever. The company has expanded into 22 countries. Millions of students use our educational programs every year. Arthur's portrait hangs in the lobby. Every new employee walks past it on their first day. Under the portrait is his favorite sentence. Character is revealed by how you treat people who have nothing to offer you. Every time I read those words, I remember a rainy afternoon. A public library. A cup of hot chocolate. And one elderly librarian who saw value in a frightened little girl when nobody else did. People often ask me what my greatest inheritance was. It wasn't the company. It wasn't the money. It wasn't the buildings. My greatest inheritance was meeting one person who proved that family isn't always the people who give you life. Sometimes, family is the person who gives you a second chance to live.